Hey, my friend. Today we're back with PaleoPulse to dive into the topic, the giant humans that hunted and cannibalized Neanderthals. Let's explore it together. In this world, there are a lot of unpleasantries that life can throw at you. We've got stuff like war, famine, pollution, murder, pineapple on pizza, and the list goes on. However, when you zoom out and look at the big picture, life in many ways has never been better for us. We get to enjoy a ton of luxuries that didn't even exist not so long ago. And besides the occasional anomaly, you'll notice that as you go farther back in time, the worse things were for people, and for other Homo species too, if they were around. And maybe that's exactly why the brutally tough Ice Age created some absolute units, such as the Neanderthals. Because as we know, hard times generally create hard people. And Neanderthals had multiple features that, if you saw them on a modern person, might genuinely look almost supernatural. That crazy biology played a big role in their relevance and popularity today, and helped make them the icons of the Ice Age. But at the same time, we might have unfairly glossed over another group of people who endured the Ice Age as well, and were freaks of nature in their own right, people who even lived alongside the Neanderthals. And the most surprising part is that this isn't some new or lost species that slipped under the radar, because the guys I'm talking about are us. Well, kind of. I'm talking about the Cro-Magnon, humans that are now believed to have been the first modern people in Europe, with their arrival dated to around 56,800 years ago during the late Pleistocene. Our knowledge of their existence stems from a discovery in France back in 1868, when scientists stumbled upon a cave dubbed Cro-Magnon that housed various human remains, including skulls and post-cranial material. At the time, researchers thought they had found a new distinct species of human, based on some interesting anatomical differences. But overall, the similarities the skeletons shared with present-day populations were just too uncanny to ignore, and they're now widely referred to as European Early Modern Humans, or EEMH for short. That conclusion came from their hallmarks: a globular brain case, upright posture, a completely flat face, a gracile brow ridge, and a seriously well-defined chin. And, surprise, surprise, those are traits shared by us today. The proof of their close relationship was also seen in their skeletal structure, which again was a lot like ours. If you somehow wound up in Ice Age Europe, you probably could have looked at a Cro-Magnon and thought, okay, that's one of us, especially compared to a Neanderthal, whose uniqueness would have been way more obvious. This being said, you still definitely would have noticed the odd thing or two about them, because it would become pretty straightforward from the get-go that Cro-Magnons were not the type of people you'd want to pick a fight with. These were not dainty little cave folks. They were built like literal action figures. And that's a big reason why early researchers thought they were a separate species in the first place. The earliest dated Cro-Magnons in particular were built quite differently, literally. One of their standout characteristics was size. Recovered adult specimens indicate that, on average, they were similar in height to post-industrial humans. Females averaged around 5'4" or 1.63 meters, while males generally stood over 5'9" or 1.75 meters, making them taller than the average adult seen worldwide today. That's pretty wild considering present-day humans are pretty much taller than ever. And compared to other contemporary humans of the time, that height would have been even more obvious. And here's the thing, that wasn't even their final form. Certain subsets of Cro-Magnons were straight-up towers. There was one population located in Eastern Europe, ranging from about 5'10" or 1.78 meters to 6'2" or 1.88 meters, meaning if they were treated as a country, that upper range would put them among the tallest populations on Earth. Even bigger Cro-Magnon males are known too. Specimens have been found reaching around 6'3" or 1.91 meters, basically taller than your average NFL player.
And these mountainous individuals were no twigs. While their skeletons were similar to ours in shape, Cro-Magnons were overall far more robustly built, with bones that were larger, broader, and denser. Every bone showed this, but the lower limbs and shoulders especially benefited from that extra size. For example, collarbones from a medium-sized Cro-Magnon could measure up to 19 centimeters, or 7.5 inches, about a quarter longer than the average today. That would have given them better leverage for shoulder movement, allowing for extremely powerful swings with a wide range of melee weapons. Their overall build also heavily implies they were insanely muscular. Some research suggests that if you compared an adult Cro-Magnon with a modern human of the exact same height, you could expect the Cro-Magnon to be around 20% heavier, with a much higher proportion of lean muscle. And yes, that sounds overkill, but it was necessary for their harsh lives in Ice Age Europe, where you had to be ridiculously durable just to get by. Multiple fossils show that individuals endured and survived a variety of ailments and catastrophic injuries. Within the Cro-Magnon rock shelter alone, multiple specimens show evidence of infection, and many, actually the majority, had fused vertebrae in their necks, believed to have come from traumatic injuries. One adult female seems to have endured a significant skull fracture at some point, but still survived for an extended period because the fracture shows bone growth. And to really drive home how brutal their lives were, even the first Cro-Magnon ever identified, Cro-Magnon 1, had a skull and face riddled with scars, believed to have been caused by a genetic disease that resulted in multiple cysts and tumors. Yet based on his body, researchers could tell he made it into adulthood and was quite old by Cro-Magnon standards when he died. Now, with that said, to be considered an elder back then, you didn't have to make it that far. Life expectancy was typically under 40, similar to what we see in Neanderthals. Researchers assume early deaths were just a common theme during the Ice Age. Yet surviving the unfairness of life wasn't the only benefit of being robust, because it also helped Cro-Magnons traverse difficult and dangerous terrain and take down prey with greater ease. And they weren't out here only hunting rabbits. The remains of bones from their prey indicate they often targeted larger megafaunal animals like horses, reindeer, bison, aurochs, and occasionally even woolly mammoths, who, as you know, were kind of a big deal. We even have frozen carcasses with both pre-mortem and post-mortem injuries attributed to human activity, which confirms these guys were very capable killers. And not even the top predators were safe, because different kinds of felines, hyenas, and bears were also victims. A common method of killing involved stone and bone-tipped spears. Another common trend among their prey is that many of them are now extinct, either locally, like hyenas in some regions, or completely, like woolly mammoths and aurochs. And those extinctions are often at least partially attributed to these early humans, which unfortunately, as you probably know, is a trend that continues with present-day populations. It's currently believed that a huge portion of species have declining populations, with many threatened by extinction. And while I love talking about extinct animals, we already have an expansive list to learn from, which is why I'm partnering again with our good friend Planet Wild. Planet Wild is crowdfunding for nature conservation, and it operates through a paid membership, where funds go to a new project partner every month. These projects take place around the world, but a recent favorite of mine was actually in Montana. You might not know this, but America was once home to vast grasslands that covered around 240 million acres, almost the size of Texas and California combined. Over time, much of it was destroyed and turned into cattle farms. Planet Wild partnered with the organization American Prairie to help bring that back by buying old cattle ranches, restoring them to their natural state, and creating safe habitats for endangered native animals. And that's just one project. There's a new one every month, and they're 100% transparent about how the funds are used, even posting a monthly YouTube video breakdown.
I've been a member for a while and honestly think it's a great way for individuals to get involved in conservation. If you want to protect Mother Nature, I highly recommend signing up. You can give whatever amount, big or small. Every dollar counts. And as a special welcome, I'll cover the first month for the first 150 people who sign up. Scan the QR code on the screen, use my code EXTINCT1, or click the link in the description or pinned comment. But their means of killing was by no means restricted to just spears. Cro-Magnons achieved remarkable mastery over a variety of ranged and melee weapons, spear throwers, javelins, clubs, blades, nets, boomerangs, and possibly primitive bows. And it didn't end there either, because each weapon came in different forms, specialized points, tailored grips, and all kinds of tweaks that show serious engineering. Unfortunately, though, the power and weapons of Cro-Magnons weren't always used only on animals, because like modern humans, Cro-Magnons also had the potential to become prehistoric murderers. And actually, remember that skull fracture I mentioned earlier? Well, it turns out skull fractures and head injuries in general were not uncommon at all, and sometimes they appear to be human-made. One of the clearest cases is Cro-Magnon 2, a male specimen over 30,000 years old who had a severe injury to the front of his face. Based on the shape, it was likely caused by a slow but power-packed blunt force weapon. It didn't kill him instantly, but it almost certainly sealed his fate because he died well before the wound could fully heal. During that period, he showed signs of intracranial hemorrhaging and brain hematomas, basically the kind of slow, miserable death you wouldn't wish on anyone. Other crushed skulls are known too, and the head seems to have been the attacker's target of choice. But sometimes death came from below the head, as seen in another specimen, often referenced as Saint Césaire I, found with a deep cut to the thoracic vertebrae that would have immediately cut off circulation to the brain. The fact the Ice Age was so harsh may have fueled violence, because encounters could happen over vital resources and social assets, like land, mating rights, and food. And I'm sure a few of you can at least relate to fighting over food. But for Cro-Magnons, things could get darker. There's evidence pointing to the grim possibility that victims may have ended up as food themselves. This comes from the discovery of human skull caps in Gough's Cave in England, dated to around 15,000 years ago, likely used as drinking cups or bowls. And it didn't stop there. Other grisly remains in the same cave show that human bodies were fully processed and butchered, soft tissue removed carefully with knives, bones cracked open to access the marrow. Worst of all, of the apparent 3 victims, 2 were very young. So yeah, people back then didn't always use their power for good, kind of like now. Another testament to Ice Age violence doesn't even involve us directly, but a close relative, the Neanderthals, who coexisted with Cro-Magnons in Europe for thousands of years. Their relationship between these two has always been curious, because Neanderthals vanished not so long after Cro-Magnons arrived. That led some to assume prehistoric warfare was a factor in their demise. While that's not believed to be the main reason anymore, violence likely wasn't absent either. In recent times, Cro-Magnons have become a main suspect in a 50,000-year-old cold case involving a Neanderthal. This poor bloke was discovered with a nasty rib injury that appears to have been caused by a stone point weapon, killing him relatively quickly. There isn't much to go on, but researchers hypothesize that based on the angle of the injury and signs it was caused by kinetic energy, the weapon was likely ranged. That matters because Neanderthals were not known to use ranged weapons, while Cro-Magnons did. So the leading idea is that a spear or dart thrown by a Cro-Magnon killed this Neanderthal.
This also highlights the advantage that ranged weapons would have given anatomically modern humans, even if they were on average less durable than Neanderthals. And it seems Neanderthals might have been on the menu as well, because a recovered Neanderthal jawbone had cut marks eerily similar to those seen on deer carcasses butchered by Cro-Magnons. The cutting technique was nearly identical, leading some researchers to suspect the Neanderthal was eaten. Now, I will say it's not conclusive. The jaw could have been used as a trophy rather than food, and cut marks alone don't guarantee the Neanderthal was killed by humans. He might have already been dead. Ultimately, while they likely had violent encounters, their general interactions may have often been pretty mundane, and based on genetic evidence, we even see signs of interbreeding between them. Specifically, it was the older Cro-Magnons who had closer genetic proximity to Neanderthals. One direct sign is seen in a 40,000-year-old specimen named Oase 1, who was around 9% Neanderthal, suggesting a Neanderthal ancestor as recent as 4 generations back, basically a great-great-grandparent. These high percentages have led to speculation that the earliest Cro-Magnons may have had features slightly reminiscent of Neanderthals. Some early specimens show slightly flattened skull caps and even occipital buns that protruded at the back, similar to Neanderthals. But over time, these features faded, as did the high amount of Neanderthal genes. And at the same time, the other characteristics that made Cro-Magnons unique also gradually lessened, including their marked robustness. These changes may be tied to the last glacial maximum, which caused major habitat loss and put strain on Cro-Magnon communities. Still, they retained certain distinct traits, including fairly sturdy jaws and large skulls. Those big skulls would have housed relatively big teeth, likely used to process a lot of meat and tough foods. And beyond animals, they ate hard nuts, seeds, roots, and plenty of plant material. But the head story doesn't end at teeth. The more interesting part is what the skull protected: the brain. Cro-Magnons' brains were huge, often bigger than ours, and more comparable to Neanderthal brain sizes. The average brain case is estimated around 1,514 cubic centimeters, while the present-day average is about 1,350 cubic centimeters. What accounted for a lot of this difference was their large frontal and occipital regions, linked to a wide range of functions. Truthfully, though, no one knows exactly how that impacted cognition or behavior. Bigger brain doesn't automatically mean smarter in a simple way. But what we can assume is that Cro-Magnons were at least as intelligent as modern humans. Currently, 5 distinct cultures spanning roughly 40,000 years are attributed to them: Aurignacian, Gravettian, Solutrean, Epigravettian, and Magdalenian. And across the board, remarkable feats were achieved by each. Their intelligence shows up in the weapons we talked about, but it also shows up in strategy. It's not always what you make, it's how you use it. Cro-Magnons figured out how to schedule mass killing events that matched the migratory patterns of megafauna. They used game drive tactics to corner large prey into confined spaces, like against cliff walls or into bodies of water, so they could kill multiple big animals efficiently. During off-seasons, they also knew when fish were most plentiful, meaning a chunk of their nutrition came from fishing at the right times. Some groups may have even followed herds seasonally, so fresh kills were always nearby.
Plants, while less dramatic, still felt the wrath of their intelligence too. Cro-Magnons learned to process a huge variety of plant foods, and evidence suggests they used at least 150 kinds of seeds, fruits, nuts, and starches. And to top it all off, Cro-Magnons may have domesticated the dog. Multiple Paleolithic dogs are associated with them, including a 36,000-year-old specimen from Belgium. A 15,000-year-old dog was even found buried alongside a man and woman, hinting that dogs played vital roles: hunting, guarding camps, and maybe even companionship. And speaking of camps, Cro-Magnons had those pretty well figured out too. Sometimes they lived in caves, other times in open-air sites where they constructed large huts, some made primarily from mammoth skulls and bones. These could be lined with grass or animal pelts to create primitive bedding and insulation. Many dwellings had an indoor hearth and working area, because even in the Ice Age, you still had to be productive. Interior design often depended on hut size, with smaller ones having fewer defined areas. These homes were crucial for warmth, and evidence shows fires were often maintained inside rather than outside. But the rest of the camp had structure too. Sites were typically divided into specific areas: hearths, kitchens, sleeping grounds, and butchering zones, each having their own place. There's also evidence that groups created multiple different camps and moved seasonally between them, allowing them to make the best use of different resources throughout the year. Based on skeleton counts and site patterns, scientists think these settlements were often small, with residents numbering no more than a few dozen. But it worked. And you didn't have to worry about a lack of social life either, because Cro-Magnon communities often interacted through trade. And this wasn't some casual swapping of scraps. It looks like full-fledged trade networks spanning across the continent. Raw materials were sourced from groups more than 120 miles or 200 kilometers away. These materials varied in function: tools, ornaments, supplies. But what's fascinating is that for some groups, trade may have been absolutely essential. During the last glacial maximum, as climate conditions worsened, some communities may have relied so heavily on trade that without it, they might not have survived. In a weird way, it's a reminder that even in brutal environments, cooperation can be just as important as strength. Trade also shows that despite living in one of the harshest eras imaginable, people still cared about the finer things: art,
clothing, and jewelry. These items were shared and traded between settlements. Art in particular was huge for Cro-Magnons, and many forms of it have been found, including body decoration. They used pigments, most famously red ochre, to decorate the torso, face, and limbs with designs ranging from simple dots to more complex patterns like animals or human figures. Tattooing, scarification, and piercings existed too, though likely less common, possibly because they could lead to infection. And of course, Cro-Magnons were accomplished cave artists. Many caves preserve their work, including famous sites in France. Animals seem to be a favorite subject. Lions, deer, mammoths, horses, aurochs, bison, and sometimes even stranger figures, including hybrid creatures with human parts. And speaking of human parts, Cro-Magnons had a fascination with at least some of them, namely the genitalia. Ever heard of Venus figurines? Yep, that was them, and they kept making them for thousands of years. But if erotic art isn't your thing, don't worry. Cro-Magnons also mastered other leisurely activities, including music. They weren't the first humans to play music, but they may have had some of the most complex musical forms up to that point. Like their weapons, their instruments came in many shapes: flutes, whistles, idiophones, drums, bull rowers, and more. These allowed Ice Age musicians to create a surprising range of sounds. In fact, scientists think we're missing a huge amount of musical history because it seems unlikely Cro-Magnons suddenly became advanced musicians out of nowhere. Their skills suggest a long tradition we simply can't see anymore. So with all this in mind, Cro-Magnons had things pretty figured out despite the Ice Age raging around them, which might make you wonder, where did they go? And the answer is, they didn't really go anywhere. They were exceptionally successful throughout the late Pleistocene. Yes, the last glacial maximum reduced some habitable regions due to extreme cold, but besides that, they did pretty well. They maintained high fertility rates over thousands of years, far outpacing what was seen in Neanderthals. That may be one reason they became the dominant humans in Europe. Their growth likely pushed the overall population in Europe up dramatically, potentially increasing by a factor of 10. By around 13,000 years ago, there may have been over 70,000 Cro-Magnons across the continent, a small number by today's standards, but massive back then. And unlike many early human groups that simply died out, scientists think Cro-Magnons were eventually absorbed into later European populations that migrated into the region. The chronology is generally described as starting with the Aurignacian, followed by the Gravettian, then Solutrean, then Epigravettian, and finally Magdalenian, the last Cro-Magnon-associated culture, lasting roughly from about 17,000 to 12,000 years ago. After that, Cro-Magnon DNA became less prevalent, but significant genetic descendants continued into the Neolithic, as seen in remains from France and Spain. Modern populations carry much less of their genetic legacy, but traces persist across many European groups. So, in a way, the Cro-Magnons didn't vanish like a mystery species. They didn't get erased, they blended. The giants of Ice Age Europe, the action figure humans with massive brains, incredible endurance, brutal lives, sophisticated tools, complex culture, art, music, trade networks, and possibly even the earliest dogs, didn't disappear. They became part of the continuing human story. And if you're sitting there thinking, okay, but what's the point for us today? It's this: the Ice Age didn't just create monsters like Neanderthals. It also shaped modern humans into something far tougher, smarter, and more adaptable than we usually give ourselves credit for. And the deeper you look into that past, the more you realize we're not as far removed from those absolute units as we like to pretend. So, what are your thoughts on today's topic? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel PaleoPulse so you won't miss any of our upcoming posts. Thanks for watching. See you next time.